Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to go in the alphabetical order from the guru known as Word Perfect Alphabetizer. And we're going to let our guests introduce themselves. All right, Miss Chloe Gardner.
Hello, I am Chloe Garner. I write science fiction and fantasy in massive chaotic universes, and we are here to have a great time.
All right, wait a minute. If you have chaotic universes, who is your chaos coordinator?
Does that one count?
Sure, we'll allow
Always.
it. All right, and for everyone that's wondering, alphabetizing on Word, they just use the first word, not the second. So it's the first name, not last name. All right, Stop sending me the messages. I know how alphabetizing works. All right, Mr. Isaac Kraft.
Hello. Isaac Kraft.
You could do better. Introduce yourself. Pretend this is like speed dating for authors.
I write science fiction and fantasy. I'm working on a YA novel, and I'm working on getting it sent off.
Out freaking standing. See, that was perfect. You had enthusiasm. You had pizzazz. Well done, sir. All right, Miss Jana S. Brown. Although I don't know what personality we have with us today.
Oh, we're talking elves. This is, well, okay, right now it's Jenna Ray, but Jadlyn Asher might write about elves sooner or later. Anyway, Janice Brown, also known as Jenna Ray. I write speculative fiction, science fiction, urban fantasy, and I like talking about elves, so I'm very happy to be here.
Out freaking standing. All right, next we have Miss Melissa McShane.
Hi, I'm Melissa McShane. I write lots and lots of fantasy in many different varieties. And I come to you from India, where I live with my husband and 2 small kittens.
So you're coming to us from the future. Is the weather nice?
Yes, it is almost half a day ahead of you where you are.
So did I tell you what you did to me last night?
No, what?
So I started your book too, and then I couldn't stop because I wanted to know what happened next. So I didn't sleep, and it's all your fault.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, you're not.
No, you're not.
No, I'm not. I'm not even a little bit. Those were fake tears.
Those are the best reviews, the ones that start, I'm so tired.
Let's be honest, JR. It wasn't Melissa's fault. It was a cat's fault.
I mean, cats are the source of all evil. So
yes. Mm-hmm.
Apparently, the way you're supposed to be on Twitter now is everyone's supposed to be an internet troll posting randomness. So I joined the shenanigans, and I let everyone know that pineapples are the devil's fruit.
Oh,
well, there you go.
So instead of responding to me there, though, everyone's been sending me these personal emails. I'm like, oh, come on, people, get with the program. That's not how this game works. All right, before I get myself in more trouble, I'm going to let Miss Terry K. Job, the many voices thereof, introduce herself.
I'm Terry K. Job once again on this crazy podcast that I call fun. Audiobook narrator, baby author, and for once I've actually written about the thing we're talking about now.
Woo!
It's not published yet, but I wrote it. Close enough.
That's okay.
Normally we would do the how we met them, but everybody on this podcast has been here at least 3 times. So I figure I'm out of ideas to make up lame stories about where we first met. So instead, we're just going to go with the religion question. Are you guys ready for this?
I met them all at Barnes & Noble.
This is a very valid one. I just shared, this is going to air in May, and anyway, I found something called Book Hala, where it's like the giant library in the sky, and I shared it because there were book goblins. So
nice.
You should be following us on the Facebook, and you'd see all my funny memes. All right, so with that out of the way, all right, Stabby, I'm going to ask you first this time. Are you ready? Because I forget you all the time.
I forget that I don't have to mute tonight. Okay.
All right. So the religion question. What's your favorite bird?
Ooh.
Bird. Bird is the word.
There's so many. So I have sparrows tattooed on me because I love sparrows. But being in the new house, I see golden eagles all the time. And they're gorgeous. So I think my favorite is changing.
Okay. All right, we're gonna go round robin, all alphabetical order. Well, no, clockwise and stuff. So Isaac, favorite bird.
Red herrings.
Okay. All right, Terry.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to go with the blue jay, or actually Stellar's jay. They're prettier.
Okay. Jana.
I like ravens. We have a whole bunch of them that live in the house next door, on top of the house next door. And so they chat at us all the time. Every time I go outside, it's squawk, 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 squawk. So we're developing communication, they and I, and eventually my raven flock is going to take over the world. I'm not going to because I don't want that much responsibility, but they totally are, and I want to be on their good side.
If you leave oats out for them, they will bring you shiny trinkets.
Yes, we're working on our rate of exchange. They like peanuts.
All right, Madam Chloe, first of her line. Oh, peacock.
Well played.
Peacock.
Watching,
It's definitely
Very
peacock.
nice.
her avatar is a peacock.
That's great.
All right, and last but certainly not least, Miss Melissa McShane.
The kestrel, because that was the name of a spy in a book I read when I was young, and I didn't discover that it was a bird until years later. So I think kestrel is great.
So I guess as a Virginian, I'm supposed to say the cardinal because it's the state bird, but I do like chickens, so I don't know. It's kind of a toss-up for me. One is pretty and the other tastes good.
True.
Chloe,
Trying to figure out where my priorities are.
I have a funny story about peacocks with you. So my sister absolutely loves pink flamingos. Like it's becoming an obsession. Like I know if it's a flamingo, I can buy it for her and she'll be happy, even if she already has 20 of the same thing. So she started buying me little peacock trinkets, like keychains and shot glasses and stuff. And I was like, why do you always buy me peacocks? Like, I don't understand. And she goes, because your hair changes just as much as their feather.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to keep things, moving, keep them on your toes. All right. So this episode is not being recorded in May, but it will be airing to you, dear listener, in May. So what will you be drinking this summer? Like, put your future goggles on and tell me, Stabby, what's beverage of choice?
Coffee.
No, but there are lots of flavors. What's your summer coffee?
Okay, so right now I'm drinking a mixture of coffee brand coffees, Roaster's Choice Argentinian. I'm probably saying that completely wrong. And their blueberry cobbler. And I grind the beans together so it tastes like chocolate covered blueberries.
Ooh.
But I hear that they have a new summer flavor coming out. So I'm just patient on the release of the new flavors.
And if you go to the link in the show notes, podcast Grunts is code, you get 10% off. All right, Isaac, what is your summer beverage of choice?
Bottled water and Gevalia K-Cup coffee with whole milk.
Okay, Terry.
Oh, yes. You said future goggles. Let's see. Probably 1 cup of coffee in the morning, followed by lemonade in the afternoon.
Okay, regular lemonade, pink lemonade, hard lemonade.
Oh, strawberry lemonade if I can get it. Regular will do, though.
Okay. All right, now you can put your future goggles on. We don't want you to get the winning lottery ticket and then not share with us.
Oh, all the green went away. Damn.
All right, Jana.
For me, it's always Diet Dr. Pepper. I will drink Diet Dr. Pepper year round. I will drink it here and there, and I will drink it everywhere. I actually also really like there's an herbal tea that has peaches and lemons in it, and I'll do iced herbal tea sometimes because that's just such a bright, lovely flavor. But most of the time, you'll catch me with my Dr. Pepper. It's true.
Okay. I mean, we'll allow it. What about Madam Chloe? Is this product placement telling us what you drink all summer?
All summer long, man. I will say that one of my favorite restaurants does a lemonade with raspberries that the bottom 2 inches of the cup are actually raspberries. and they just pour the lemonade on top, and you get to mush it all up yourself with the straw. It's fantastic. This is good summer drinking.
Okay. What about you, Melissa?
I too drink Coca-Cola all year round, and in India it is sugar Coca-Cola, not high fructose corn syrup, which is even better. But here, my summer drink of choice is fresh limeade, sparkling. And every time I go, you can get it everywhere. And every time I go to a new restaurant, I order it to see if it's actually fully leaded limeade or if they've just sort of waved a lime in the general direction of the drink. And that matters. So, but yeah, it's either Coca-Cola or sparkling limeade.
Would that be lime wavium?
Yes.
So I'm kind of basic. I enjoy French vanilla coffee all year round, cream. So I make my coffee double strong so that way I can add the cream and stuff. Strong coffee and the cream in it. I really do wish I liked iced coffee because it gets really hot in Virginia in the summer, especially on the southern side of Virginia. But I just never found an iced coffee that I liked. I spent lots of money chasing the one true iced coffee, but none have risen the bar. So
I know you like your pumpkin spice. So
yeah,
during the fall season, go to
I put on my basic white girl Uggs and my vest, and I go get some.
Put your Uggs and your vest on, but get yourself a pumpkin spice cold brew. It's like the cream is infused with it, and it slowly melts into your coffee. That is the only way I do iced coffee.
Okay.
Is the cold foam because it melts into it. But JR, for you, Coffee Mate just put out a new coffee creamer duo, and it's half French vanilla, half caramel, and it tastes like autumn in a cup.
Go on.
And then for Miss Terry, if you're looking for something with a little spice, since you like strawberry lemonade, I live in the mountains now, so when, I need a drink around the campfire at night, I found that strawberry bubbly with a little bit of Deep Eddy's lemonade vodka in it. Tastes exactly like a strawberry lemonade, and you don't know that there's any alcohol in it.
Ooh, that sounds dangerous.
I was thinking the same thing.
Dangerous but delicious.
Okay. I have had an iced caramel macchiato that I liked, but it was just they're overpriced, so I'm cheap, and I'm like, I mean, is it really worth $6 for 12 ounces? Probably not. And unfortunately, all of the local coffee shops kind of were driven out of business by the Great Siren. So unfortunately, not as many options here as when I was at grad school, where there was like an indie coffee shop around every corner. So hopefully those will come back, and maybe like we can wave our magic wand. So have you guys seen was it not Independence Day, the Asteroid Armageddon movie, where like they're asking these miners that are going to go to the asteroid what they want if they live, and the guy was like, I want you to bring 8 tracks back. Like, I want indie coffee shops back.
Yeah,
we need to make those great. So all right, now that we got the religion stuff out of the way, let's talk about the topic that brought us here. So elves. Now, Melissa, you asked us to do this panel because you love the elves. So is it just because you like Christmas so much?
No, I took my inspiration for my elves from Terry Pratchett, who was of the opinion that they were big, scary, and awful. And so I like there's sort of a division between Tolkien elves and elves based on our world's mythology. And so for the elves based on our world's mythology, I like the idea that they were cruel and horrible and would enslave and taunt humans if they could. And I find that fascinating because we're still obsessed with them. They're beautiful, they're dangerous, and we don't care that they see us as bugs. I like that idea. That I think that's full of possibility.
Legolas does not approve.
No, Legolas, well, he's a Tolkien elf, and they are their own thing. They are snooty and haughty and wonderful, and we love them too, but, completely different.
Do you think?
Well, that depends how far back into the mythology you go.
True.
Some of them were real.
Yeah. Well, but they were like, any human where we have variation. Some are really good, some are really evil, and so yeah. I mean, Tolkien's elves are as well, for lack of a better word, human as anything in those respects.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's possible for both kinds of elves, the ones that would just as soon eat you as look at you, and the high and mighty high fantasy elves, can they exist in the same universe?
I sure hope so, because that's another thing that I'm doing with my series. Although they're both of the same stock, but the elves are not all evil, or rather, not all of the elves they encounter are evil.
So some of them didn't drink their Ovaltine, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have no less than 3 running around in one of my universes that have distinctly different civilizational characteristics, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Are they like the comparison, I guess, with the Klingons, where they've got the weird look from the next generation versus Klingons from the original show? Are you going with that kind of divide culturally? Is it sub races that are different? Like, how do you justify that?
There's the high elves. The way that I grew up believing in elves, you have the Rocky Mountain elves, who are tall and gray and slow and considered. And then you have the Irish elves, and they party with leprechauns.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As one would.
And so I have high elves and I have low elves, and the low elves are running around stealing things and being nuisances and not particularly influencing the plot in one direction or another, just being nuisancesome. And then I have another race of elves that is particularly warrior based and martial and always at war and always off in conflict, and they fight each other, and they fight the high elves, and they hunt the low elves, and they hunt the humans, and they fight. And the low elves might actually come in 26 different species. Nobody's started counting yet because they just don't care enough.
So how come you didn't make the mountain elves hillbilly elves? Because that could be funny.
It did not occur to me at the time.
Jed the elf with his mullet, his like, I guess, mead or ale or whatever. You know, you could even make him drink like PBR or some other trash beer. I don't know.
Gosh.
I have enough authors here. Somebody needs to write a story. It can be a short story. But somebody needs to write a story about the elf that made it through the second set of interviews with Santa and then still didn't get the job. Can you imagine what that elf would feel about Christmas?
It's true.
So Nick is trying to get me to do another Santa anthology. Unfortunately, the guy that did the kick-ass cover has since retired from artistry, so I would have to find someone else who could meet that epic standard of awesomeness. But I have been thinking about that. Maybe for 2025, I could make that happen, because I kind of booked up 2024. And my mom does the back end of all the anthologies, so she's actually the one reading them and editing them and doing all the stuff. I just like herd the cats, and I was told if I give her another one, she might kill me. So,
yeah,
don't do that.
Respect the mom.
So we got so many submissions, and I'm not used to that, because when we started pairing with Three Ravens, that we actually are doing like multiple volumes of each theme. So like one anthology is like 2 or 3 sometimes. And so I was told there's a limit, and we've reached it, and I should not push it.
Probably a good idea.
She knows where I sleep, so probably I should just listen.
Yeah.
So, but 2025, we're going to be doing a Christmas one, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we-
Always obey your mom.
Nick and I can write that story for you. When good elves go bad.
That's right.
So,
to the final stage of interviews.
Like that could be
Well,
that.
Go ahead.
You could do like the Bad Boss interview type shows that they did for a while.
Right.
You could do like Santa is the bad boss, like sneaking into the. Anyway, Isaac, elves. What is it that made you want to come on this panel? Why do you like elves?
For one thing, I'm a big Tolkien fan. I've even collected the Tolkien Companion from '98. The thought that elves are, green, they vary, but it seems like Tolkien is the base, the granddaddy of the how they are now, and I can, I can make characters similar to them. They might not be immortal, but they're certainly long-lived, and also the thought that they're rare. Anyhow.
Okay, so that's the inspiration for many people, Tolkien, and you started from there. I can dig it. All right, so what about you? What stories did you write them in, Terry?
Well, the one of mine that's not published yet. Working on it. I did something a little different with mine. My introduction to elves was Tolkien as well. You know, my dad reading The Hobbit to me when I was 3 years old, and then just progressing from there. But they're like one of the oldest races in Tolkien's world. I flipped that around, and they're the youngest in mine. They're the newest. They've had a lot of impact on the world, but they're still kind of that. They're rare, but there's backstory reasons for that. And there's a lot of stories about them. There's a lot of people who hate them in the world right now because reasons. But there's a few people who still think they're really good people. Just depends on who you ask. So, of course, I have one running around the world. Well, actually, two of them.
As one does.
Oh,
do you think the elves have to have the pointy ears?
Mine do. They're not like way back there, but they're vaguely pointed.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Chloe? Are your elves, since you went a little different on yours, did you give them pointy ears as at least a common through line?
The larger species of them, yes. The small ones, I'm not sure anybody's got a good look yet.
So the small ones almost sound more like pixies then.
They're more like groundhogs.
If they see their shadow as spring coming.
They appear out of nowhere and they steal things and they run away. It has a little bit of a gnomish feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And almost all elves get some of those physical distinctions because that's why we use the word elf as shorthand. It is we say elf and we want people to get at least a general type of picture. And I've had people say, oh yes, I'm calling them elves, but they are giant and stocky and they use battle axes and they have beards and this, that, and the other, and they go on and on. It's like, but nothing you've described here fits what that shorthand means to us.
Yeah.
And not to say you absolutely can't, but you really have to line up with your reader expectations, because when you say one of these popular fantasy races, there's certain assumptions that are already made. So you have to be careful about how far you break that assumption and how far you roll with it. And you say, yeah, they've got the pointy ears, but mine have piercings all over. Or you've got the Deedlit, who has got ears that are literally out to here. So are the ears the ones that you could fly with, or are they very subtle? So there's lots and lots of room to play, but we do have an immediate thought when somebody says it's an elf or it's an elven race. That tells us certain things, and then if you break that, you've got to regain your reader's trust. So yeah, you kind of have to watch those things.
So
actually, I'm going to disagree a little bit because what you're talking about reflects the attitude that urban fantasy has given us for elves. That all these races that you're talking about, those have expectations in urban fantasy that you can't really break without breaking that immersion. When you step outside the urban fantasy realm, defining new characters, defining elves, defining dwarves becomes a little more easy. It becomes a little less of a, I have defined for you. Now, you still can't go too far outside that, but it's going to be, sorry, my husband just came in here, waved a Coke in my face and made a face. So I'm distracted. But anyway, my point is that depending on the genre you're writing in, you have more flexibility. I think for sure, urban fantasy is going to demand that you have elves and they match a certain variant type. I think outside that, you can go a little bit further, as long as you're not saying elves are dwarves and dwarves are gnomes, and because then you're just playing on other stereotypes.
So
because even UF will let you do that. But yes, it's how much flexibility will your readers give you before they don't recognize it as an elf anymore.
And it's a lot about drawing on the shared culture to shorthand, as you said, into what a character is, because you don't have 150 individuals to go characterize all of them collectively and figure out what do all of these individuals share. So you use a word that tells you what this individual has in common with its community, and that saves you from having to go head to toe description and then the characteristics as a personality and what skills do they have and all of that other stuff. You use a word, elf, and then all you have to do is take the things away from it that I'm not using and substitute what I am.
So
and using. Sorry, we just keep overriding you, JR.
I know, I love it.
You're trying really hard, but yeah, I think that's true. I think that you're defining elf, and you do start from here's what people assume, but not everybody assumes the same thing about elves. It's very general. They do, but it's like I was saying. You have Tolkien elves. You have Irish elves, which you could stretch the definition and say that boggarts and pixies and leprechauns are all elves. They're all fairy folk. But what are you depending on to build that picture? What are you using, and then what do you do to alter that picture without making it so they're no longer elves?
Well, and it's interesting because in urban fantasy and some of that kind of thing, we're just going to keep talking, JR. You don't get to. Hang on. There's a lot of stuff that it's fae romance, it's fae based and all that kind of thing. But what they describe as fae, then they get in and describe that. I'm like, they're big muscular elves. They're still elves, but they don't want to use that word because fae is the one that the market is attaching to right now. But what their romantic leads usually are elves. They're not all the other fairy folk that falls under fae. And that's what I do in my one urban fantasy world. The elves are at the top, and they are the rulers over all of the lesser fae, and that's where you put the pixies and the powery and all those other kinds of things. So it's just interesting the different ways that we look at it, depending on the worlds we're building, depending on the market that we're going to. Because every time I see these fae romances, I start looking at them like, that's just an elf. It's not, but it is fae in that bigger classification. All right, JR, say something before we start.
Okay, go ahead.
So I looked it up. An elf is a type of humanoid supernatural being that started in Germanic folklore and then started to spread out. They were especially popular in northern Germanic mythology and spread from there to Icelandic poet Edna and Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda. I'm probably butchering the heck out of that. In medieval German-speaking cultures, elves generally seem to have been thought of as beings with magical powers and supernatural beauty, ambivalent towards everyday people and capable of either helping or hindering. And this continued up past the post-Christian Germany. So that is the definition. It started in Germany and spread outwards from there. I imagine that other cultures had similar beings that they called different things, because most folklore is there's universality to a lot of it.
It rhymes.
So it's elves as we know it started in northern High Germanic mythology.
Cool.
So to kind of touch base on what Melissa and Jenna and everybody were just saying is, an elf or a pixie or a fae or whatever, depends on the world. If you just look at even the most famous elves, they all their worlds are so different. So you have like Link from The Legend of Zelda. You have Dobby from Harry Potter. You have the Dark Elves from Thor, the Dark World. You have Jen from the Dark Crystal. You have Prince Nuadu from Hellboy. You have Buddy the Elf. And then, if you really want to take things and go sideways with it, you have the evil elves from Krampus. So I think really the world that it's built in really defines that type of elf. Because you can be a Buddy the Elf eating gum off of the streets of New York City, but you can also, be a Krampus elf and just be out there trying to harm people who no longer have the spirit of Christmas.
So you mentioned dwarf, and you want not comparing the two. Ironically, from the etymology, the word dwarf comes from the Old German as an evolution of the word elf. So the concept of dwarves evolved from the concept of elves. So it's kind of funny that most people have the idea that they hate each other and they're like always at war.
No.
Since and it's that umbrella again. It's the umbrella of fae of magical creatures, and then the etymology starts splitting off into all
Well,
these
it
different
started
things
with
based-
elf, then dwarf, and then fairy split from
Fairy.
there. And then somewhere along the way, they all started meaning separate things. But they at one point in time, the words were all interchangeable.
Oh, baby.
Yeah, mostly, you know, something that is going to cause me problems or that I might be able to strike a deal with, which is never a good idea, and get something out of. And then we made it more specific as we've put together.
And the original word had a similar meaning to the hidden one or the white ones. And I guess that makes sense given it's in Europe. And everybody that lived in Europe at the time, they're living outdoors. I can't imagine any of them were actually pale. Life didn't afford that. So having a being that was that pale, almost like sun never touched it, would be standout. It would be something unique to them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So anyway, so it's my Wikipedia deep dive. You may continue. Well, you know what? Since we've got a pause, we're going to shamelessly shill for the woman this time. We're going to air that commercial.
Hey there, this is author Katie Cross. I'm coming at you with an offer for a best-selling fantasy audiobook titled Flame, and it's totally for free. Here's a little bit more about it. Dragon servants Sana and Isadora Spence live deep in Leadham Wood, where persnickety dragons and wars on the borders are the least of their worries. Thanks to years of simmering tension, the hidden village is destined to crack, and soon. Sana's deep love for the giant beast causes her to make an irreversible mistake, while Isadora's disinterest in the dragons leads her to a fateful decision that will change the course of the entire world. Can the sisters prevent everything they know from falling apart? Or do they allow it to break and pave the way for new growth? Join the beloved sister witches in Flame, the first book in the Dragon Master trilogy. Just go to www.katiecrossbooks.com/flame-audiobook to get your free copy today.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. And with that out of the way, we're going to get back to talking about elves. So we've mentioned that there are several versions of them. Do you guys have a favorite? Oh, I see a cat. Isaac. Well done. We have company.
It's an elf.
Oh, it's an elf.
Elf in disguise.
I thought it was a Khajiit. So do you guys have a favorite version of the elves?
Oh.
That's a hard question because they're all, again, so different to the world that they're in. I just want them to be well developed. You know, I want to feel like they fit there and that they're interesting within, you know, whatever's going on. So I end up having lots and lots of favorites.
Mm-hmm.
I'm emotionally tied to the idea of the high elves who are distant and wise, and the idea of someone who is immortal or nearly or immortal who watches over the world as it spins away is just sort of a comforting mythology.
Mm-hmm. I like alien elves. I mean, I want to feel like they're not human. That they have interests and concerns that are very different from ours. And so any elf that meets that criterion is something that I'm interested in.
I always like the elves. I always like the elves as they're depicted in Shannara's Elf Quest by was it Terry Brooks, I think? It's been a while since I've read those. But they were more like nature-based wood creatures. They were descendant from fairies, where the other races in that world were all descendants of humans. And I liked that it was kind of a mix of the eternal and still very much human in that, you know, they just want to be left alone in the woods to do their thing and, you know, don't destroy the world. Kind of like trees.
I've always been emotionally attached to the Keebler elves. They're there for me through my ups and downs.
That's true.
This is true. Yeah.
I mean, cookies, man. Come on.
Oh,
they can live in all my trees.
Hold on. We gotta give credit where credit is due.
All right. Yes.
This is my work snack food. It sits on my chair with me.
She prepared for the elf chat.
That's
making me hungry.
For those on the recording, she is teasing us with Keebler Elves fudge cookies, and now I am really hungry. Thank you.
All right, so you're tied or favorite to the high elf concept. What is it about that makes it so appealing to you?
I think for me, it's kind of that sense of loss and tragedy. Like, I keep going back to Tolkien's Elf. That's probably my favorite version of them in general. And there's just that sadness about them. Like, their time is done. They've already done all the shenanigans that they're going to do for the most part. And so there's that nostalgia to them, I think.
So is it the high elves that's speaking to you, or the concept of the old race that's fading, that you're liking? Because you could do that without it being an elf.
That's true. I think it's a combination of the two. That sense of nostalgia, but also that race that's experiencing that is that ethereal, beautiful being.
Okay.
Because you could argue the same thing in Tolkien's world with the dwarves. I mean, you don't really hear as much about them, at least in the stories I've read. But it does kind of have that same sense, but it doesn't hit the same way. At least not for me.
They're still hot-blooded.
Yeah, that's true.
I still love the tricksters and the meddlers and the ones who, despite their age, are still coming up with things to do. And I guess part of this is because as I'm getting older, people go, "Oh, you're getting older, getting boring." I'm like hell I am. I don't want to get boring. I mean, okay, maybe there are certain things I physically can't do anymore, but other than that, get off my lawn. But I think that's because part of my earliest elves goes back to Midsummer's Night Dream.
Okay.
That's one of the first ones that I remember reading very early in school because we had a teacher that was obsessed with it. And it was that whole, we're playing jokes, and Oberon and Titania had years together and they're still poking at each other. And yet they come together in the end. And so there's still a love story there. There's still a little bit of romance. There's all these things happening. And when I think about a lot of my favorite elves and elf types, the high elves are great. They are, they're all the things that they are. But I sure love the stories where it is, even helpful ones like the shoemaker's elves. Where they show up and they make shoes, and the elves that show up in all these stories, and sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're tricksters, but they can be so many different things. And I love that mutability that says we can be all of these things, but we're always new. I hate the idea of the magic fading away, I guess. So I like the elves that are still actively involved and being a part of the story.
So one of the common tropes for those that came to elves by way of tabletop role-playing is the concept of the half being, half human, half orc, half whatever, which means everyone's getting frisky, but we're going to fade to black and skip to that part and come to the 9 months or however many months. Maybe it's longer for elves. I don't know. But do you have a problem with the concept of like the half elves that are maybe, a human and an elf just loved each other a lot and the story came a couple months later?
It worked for Spock.
That's fine. Spock took genetic engineering. Spock was a space elf. Vulcans are space elves.
Yep, Vulcans are space elves, and that it translates really well into science fiction. But no, I don't think about the genetics of it really, really hard because my genetics classes are screaming in the back of my head about the viability. But for a story, it's fun because it puts us into the half being, and we see this in everything. People, they're half witches, they're half mermaid, they're half elves, they're half whatever, because they're trying to connect that magical with the human. And it also puts them immediately into a fish out of water where they don't belong to either group entirely. And that's a story that we like to relate with.
And I think that if you can have a half elf, that suggests things about the nature of elves and humans, that they're not as far apart as you think. And I think that makes for an interesting story, as well as the whole I'm torn between two natures. There's, if we could be created, then what does that say about elves' famous indifference to humanity, to how many elves in that tradition think of themselves as superior to humans, but you were able to produce, a child. So maybe not that individual thinks he's superior to humanity, but elves in general. And so the nature of the half elf is, I think, something that raises those questions of if that's possible, what else is possible between humans and elves?
No, it puts it into a situation of where did these races come from?
Right.
And at the end of the day, are they ultimately the same?
Yeah.
And I have no problem with a mythology that asks that question. I'd like to have clear rules on who is of the same and who isn't of the same. And if those rules end up to be untrue, that's plot. But that's just world building, and all bets are off. You're allowed to do whatever you want, I think.
Yeah.
Well, it's why
Yeah,
in
see,
science. Okay. They
I
always
didn't-
have to ask that question. See, now we're going to keep doing that. Knock it off. You go.
So I answered that question right off because in my own mythology, elves came from humans. So yeah, there's not much problem with viability or fertility there, whichever way you look at it. But that's the mythology of that particular world.
Most of the time in nature, when you get beings that, two different, linked species reproduce together, the offspring itself is unviable, even if it lives normal life. But I don't think that necessarily has to apply when you're talking about alien beings or supernatural beings, because magic can solve all things.
Mm-hmm.
And you just wave your hands and say, because magic. Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle.
It works.
Well, in science fiction, there's very often the idea of a general's beginning in space, whether it's an elder race or whatever, that spread certain genetic materials to lots of different planets, which each evolved in different ways. But when you bring them back together, it still works. And it's one of the ways it's one of the hand waviums that's used for why it is that so many species happen to be bipedal and they can have kids together and all of these things, and that the difference between Vulcans and Romulans and Klingons and everything else is different makeup. And so those were, it's one of the explanations that's often used in science fiction, and you can kind of do the same thing with your elves and humans and whatever. Is there's a common ancestry at some point, which then went different ways, but when you bring them back together, that still allows for that viability.
All you have to know about science fiction is once you invert the polarity of the lithium crystals, you're good.
Fixes everything.
Fixes everything. Right. Basically, that's space talk for did you turn it on, off, and back on again.
Yeah.
So is there a fantasy equivalent to that? Turn it off and on again? Is that like just smacking them? Would that work?
It's magic. It's did you wave the wand?
Magic.
Yep.
So do you have a preference of whether the elves exist in a sci-fi setting or a fantasy setting or even paranormal modern Earth?
It's a tool.
Yeah.
And
I
just need to know why they're there.
The job.
Mm-hmm. I read a series once where the elves in space, it was a science fiction series, the elves were deliberately genetic engineered by themselves to be alien to humans. They wanted to distinguish themselves from humans. So they are still human, but they resemble, they're tall and pale, and I don't remember if they had pointed ears, but they're essentially space elves. And it was, as far as I could tell, the author wanted to explore ideas of elves in space. And I think that was great. It was really engaging. The elf characters were interesting. They were highly political. And they had also maneuvered themselves into a position where their fertility was so low, they were going to be eliminated because just by inability to breed. And so there were also issues of, the science fiction issue was, how human can you stay if you're trying to diverge? So that was different from, I think, what we deal with elves in fantasy. But it was an interesting story.
What about you, Isaac? Any thoughts you care to share? You got to unmute, though. There you go.
What I would say, what I understand is elves are. I'm comfortable with them being in their fantasy realm.
Okay, that's fair. You don't have to lie to us and tell us you like something you don't. You're cool. You can be a purist, Tolkien or bust. I get it. Okay. What about you,
guys
Chloe?
if you guys want to play with some, you can come out to my house, because I don't know if they are elves, goblins, pixies, or what, but they keep moving my stuff.
That's the brownies. You didn't pay them.
Yep, that's right. No saucer of milk. Yeah.
So what about you, Chloe? You comfortable with elves and sci-fi in space?
I think that an elf is a tool that gives you a humanoid race with some characteristics that you can just run with, and you just do it, and you can put that anywhere you want. Science fiction and fantasy aren't a structure, they're a setting, and it's okay to put anything in those settings and just start to play. Non sequitur, if I may. Everybody's talking about their first elves, and I'm sitting here struggling. Who was my first elf in literature and fantasy somewhere? And I'm wrestling with it because I know the answer, but at the same time, it's the wrong answer. So how do we feel about Peter Pan being considered an elf? Because that is the first elf in my life, for sure.
You don't
I
want
think
my
by some
opinions on Peter
definitions that
Pan.
we've already talked about, you could totally lump
He's an
Peter
elf.
Pan in there. Sorry.
He has pointy ears, doesn't he?
Yep.
Yeah.
He's got pointed ears.
Okay,
He can fly. He's a mischief maker.
Immortal.
Are we talking about the book, or are we talking about the Disney movie?
It's
Because
all
in the
visual.
book, he is very different from how he turns out. Just like Tinkerbell is a very different creature than the one in the Disney movie or in the later films where they rehabilitated her. So I would, my experience with Peter Pan is from the book. I mean, I watched the movie and stuff, but so for me, Peter Pan is a human trapped in the fairy world, and it is an interesting question whether that makes him an elf, because I think if he is an elf, that's really different. That's really fascinating. I kind of like that idea. I don't know that I would go with that, but if it is, I'd be interested in seeing where that went.
It's not really an artistic opinion. It's a mimetic impression. You know, I'm trying to find what it just keeps going back. It's Peter Pan. It's definitely Peter Pan.
Okay.
At the
All
least,
right.
he's an elf in attitude.
Okay. So one of the first off, Terry and Jana, you did not weigh in. Elves in sci-fi. Are you good? No? Yes? Hate it? Purist?
I prefer fantasy, but I don't mind having elves in space.
Okay. Jana?
I played Shadowrun. I'll put elves anywhere. I like them in space. I like them in cyberpunk. I like them in urban fantasy. I like them in fantasy. Like Chloe says, they're a tool. So I like them used well. You can put them in just about any setting where it's going to be appropriate, and I'm willing to give you my suspense of disbelief. If you say they are cowboy elves in the Wild Wild West, that's a bigger stretch, but give me the background to where it makes sense. Weird West is a thing.
Yeah. No.
And I could do a cowboy elf, and I think it might be really, really fun. So yeah, I can take them anywhere. And we were talking in the chat a little bit about ElfQuest. And ElfQuest is a comic book by Richard and Winnie Pini, and they start with it feeling like it's very much a traditional fantasy kind of thing with the elves in the woods and all this, that, and the other. But as you follow the story, you find out that no, they're aliens that came here and made themselves look like elves because they were appealing to human fantasies. And then bad things happened, and they ended up in a much earlier place in the timeline. And now the humans they're dealing with were not dreaming of elves as a fantastical being; they were something else entirely. So in that case, we got elves both. It really puts you in that fantasy world, and then completely flipped it on its head, and you go, oh, well, that's a completely different thing. And I love that they got the best of both of those worlds and continued the quest based on this dual nature of these fantasy elves that were very earthbound and all this kind of stuff, and these elves that ride around in a glowing palace that turns into an egg and goes from world to world and learns things. So you can do all sorts of neat things with them.
I keep hearing rumors that one of the authors I narrate for routinely is doing a space elf thing that she keeps apologizing to me for in advance. I don't know why.
That's unnerving.
Yes, it is, but I'm very curious.
So one of the common tropes with elves is that, much like dwarves, they are also creators of things, craftsmen of exquisite skill. So is that a trope that you guys like to see? Because, in a lot of, if you played tabletop games, you played any of the RPGs on the video game consoles, that is a thing that elves are known for, the armor that is both lightweight and artistically beautiful. So if you like, light armor for your character build, it's generally elven armor. Is that something you like, the concept, or do you prefer them not to be creatives, I guess?
No, I like that. Yeah. I like the idea that they not only are creators, but they're creators of things that are beyond human imagination, that they come up with things that we would never think of, and yet are so beautiful that we would want to adopt them. And, because why wouldn't you? So I like that idea. I think in my book, there's elves from the past and there's elves from the present. And one of the elves from the past is busy recreating all the elven magic he can remember from his time, because most of it is lost. And so he is a creator, and he comes up with all these wonderful things. And that's really fun as an author, to be in the head of the elf, thinking, okay, what can I do now? What can I make that is just a little bit different, that is extraordinary, that that people will say, oh yeah, that's only an elf would think of that. And that would be really great.
I know one of the common tropes was that elves, for whatever reason, I think because they have better eyesight, were always good archers. So Isaac was just typing in the chat, because he's a little shy today, that the elves in Skyrim, for instance, which is the Elder Scroll universe, give you an archery bonus. A lot of worlds will do that. That is one of the benefits of being an elf, for instance, is better in nature and better with ranged weapons. Do you think that has to happen with elves, or is that part of what makes an elf, like the pointy ears?
Well, it's like the crafting sort of nature. You have a character race that by trope has knowledge and powers that are unavailable to humans. So you mix them in with humans, and they're going to use those things to make things that humans can't. And that's a competitive advantage in a market. That's a great thing for them to do. When you look at what kind of war skills are they going to breed up as a race, they're slender and they're light and they're fast. You're not going to give them a warhammer. These are going to be people who have generation after generation practiced with a bow, because once you get into a melee style of fight, they're going to break. And so it suits the tropes that go along with it. And if you're going to break that, you just need to have a story that explains why. But it's a really easy default because they come in a set.
Yeah.
Well, and some of that ties into games like Dungeons and Dragons, where you look at it and you go, okay, if you're going to build an optimal party by the math, in order to make all your math work out well so that you can actually fight the monsters, you need a fighter, a wizard, a cleric, and a rogue. And sometimes an archer can kind of fit in between there. So some of that is also about party balance and about giving everybody something to do. And this is both when you're playing games and when you're looking at telling stories. When everybody is an archer, you have to work a whole lot harder to figure out what is unique about each of them. Not that you can't tell amazing stories where the entire party does one thing, but when you can say, this is the person who does this and this is the person who does that, and they have their specialties, that can sometimes make it a little bit easier to tell the story, because you don't have everybody rushing in and saying, I'm the healer. And in Dungeons & Dragons groups, this happens. It's why most groups are fairly small, because if you've got 10 people and you start duplicating all those skills, then it becomes, well, whose job is it anyway? And so we pull a lot of that into the way that we write, because we want the specialization that lets us be able to say everybody has a job, and when they do it well, then the entire party works well together and are able to accomplish things. And so it's kind of a shorthand. It's another way to do shorthand in our writing and have people attached to those different qualities, those different niches.
When I introduced the kids to tabletop gaming, I let the oldest read the rule book, and he got mad because he thought I tricked him with a math game. And I promised him that.
Yeah.
But I don't even think intrinsically most people think about what you're talking about, balancing the numbers that run the game in the background. I think there's just the idea of, You've got to be able to protect the group from a distance. You've got to be able to heal the group. And then, oh, by the way, maybe somebody up front swinging the big swords. I think it just kind of makes sense. In much the same way, modern armies do combined arms. It's just skills that complement each other, so they overlap and perform, together are a better whole. Because you could run a party that was all archers, just they got to stay far enough away they can use their bows, which means that if you can close the distance, any bad guy automatically is at a huge advantage at that point. And I think it comes back to the basics of understanding warfare and human nature in general. So anyway, we've talked about favorite types of elves. Are there any favorite elf characters that you have, like any specific one that stood out to you? I know Stabby's got one because she typed in the side chat.
That's not mine, JR. That's yours.
She was mentioning the Wayne and Laney from Puppy Women, because I really like that as a Christmas show. It's like Special Forces soldiers meets Santa's Christmas, and they got to go in. We did an episode of it, so you can check it out. But they go in and prep the houses for Santa. But yeah, I don't.
My favorite elves were always the troublemakers.
For me,
they weren't violent, but they were little troublemakers. Those were always my favorite ones.
My problem is everyone that does their elves gives them these really long names with so many vowels and apostrophes and crap. And it's like Welsh. I can never pronounce it, so I don't even I can't cement it into my head. Although at least with Welsh, I'm convinced that's not a real language or culture. They're faking it when the English show up. And then people just started thinking it was real. They're really just Scots or Irish or something, and they just speak English.
It's like
Please
Fizbin
send
in
all
Star
hate
Trek.
mail.
Exactly.
Come on.
And nobody's ever complained. I've never gotten Welsh hate mail, so I must be right.
I've never gotten hate mail at all, JR.
They send it all to me.
I find it so funny that I'm over here and I'm like, yeah, I set up an email, a Twitter, Instagram, and a TikTok. I don't get any of the hate mail. JR still gets all of the hate mail.
I do. I get hate mail from episode 10 on Sci-Fi Shenanigans, which was 2016, about my opinion on Starship Troopers. I still get hate mail on that. That's not even up on the new podcast. They have to track down our defunct YouTube channel from because we got locked out for whatever reason, and they still listen to that episode, and then they send me the hate mail. I'm like, come on, people.
So Nick's co-workers came out to visit him, check on him, everything. They didn't know he was going back to work today. So they came out last weekend and we did a makeshift barbecue thing. And a couple of his co-workers are like, I've never seen Starship Troopers. What is that? I was like, let's make a night of it. And I sat everybody down. They're like, that is the worst movie ever. And I'm like, but it's funny. Just bad.
I can appreciate that. All right. So
hold up.
Back to elves, because you're not going to shit all over my childhood. And we're going to move on. We're going to talk about elves. So elves as characters, do you have a favorite?
Yes.
Mine is super obvious and super mainstream, but it is definitely Legolas doing parkour on an elephant.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Which is, again, very different from the book.
I know.
Because he was not an action hero.
Does not matter.
I know, but it was gorgeous.
They made that beautiful.
Gorgeous.
Okay, mine, we already mentioned, I think Madam Stabby mentioned, Prince Nuada from Hellboy 2. Scary and wonderful,
gorgeous.
And that actor is amazing. And but that character was the inspiration for the elves I wrote about. And so I have to say he is my favorite.
I've done a lot of theatrical makeup, and when I watched that movie and I saw him standing there, I was like, he's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. He's gorgeous.
I don't know whose mind that came out of, but I need to meet them and shake their hands.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
I've been thinking about it, and I'm kind of split between two. One of them is one of the I can talk. One of the Tolkien elves, Medros, for those at all familiar with the Silmarillion and that brick. But then there's also Arya Drottningu, I think I said that right, from the Inheritance series by Christopher Paolini. Those are some interesting elves too. So somewhere between those two.
I don't know. I also like, and this is another Christmas one, Will Ferrell's buddy character in the Elf movie.
We're not friends.
Just because it was so ridiculous. That, I mean, how do you not watch that and laugh? But
I liked the Record of the Lodos War. I liked Deedlit and I liked Puritas. They were a very different kind of elf. Anime does elves like everything else. Anime does everything to the nth degree, and they did elves to the nth degree with the giant ears and everything else. But I liked both of them. They had different powers. They were powerful in their own right. They had very important roles to play. Broken romances. I mean, they had all the things. That was just a fun series, and I liked their presence there.
Isaac?
I agree with Jana. I liked Deedlit from Record of Lodos War. But also with Tolkien, especially with The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Ring, not necessarily as much Legolas, but as much as the elves at the last Homely House. They're in trees, they're singing silly songs, they're poking fun at the dwarves, and yet they're still elves. They're still super strong, tall warrior types, and they're decent people if you can put up with their nonsense. To be able to do that and still drive away Dark Riders, something is good about them. That doesn't stick with anything else.
Okay. What about you, Terry?
I thought I answered that already. Sorry.
No, I'm going to give you, because you've always got something to say, and we always talk over you, so I'm letting you talk today. It's the Terry Show.
Oh my God, hide. Medros from the Silmarillion, and then Arya Drottningu from Inheritance are probably two of my favorite elves.
Okay.
Dobby.
Dobby, is that an elf? I thought
he's an elf.
Dobby is a free elf.
He is a free elf, that's right.
Dobby is a free elf. They gave him a sock.
Yeah. So is Winky, technically.
Yeah. Poor Winky.
Some enjoy it more than others.
Freedom is rough.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I love Dobby. I cried when he. Yeah.
Oh.
All right, so we'll move on then. We don't want to make you sad. So, are you guys working on anything right now? Because we're at the end of the show. We've got plenty of that we've had to say. But Isaac, are you working on elves right now? Any elf story you got hopping in that little brain pan of yours?
Currently, no, but I kind of have some form of one in my YA story. I've made a world. You can find her in the Pirates and Parlays shorts anthology for Corn Scribblers. They're porcelain. They're like China dolls with bright hair, and when they get excited, their eyes light up. And they're rare, and most of them have been hunted for their silica dust blood, which can be turned into many things to power pirate ships. But yeah, I've got one of those or two in my YA story.
Okay. Cool. Terry, you going to do more elves? Because you mentioned you're working on one now in the as yet unpublished novel, the great magnum opus of fantasy.
Yep, that's actually what I'm working on right now. Is the third book of that trilogy, and a couple of my POVs are elves, so we're gonna have to see where they go. I didn't mean for this
So-
to be three books. I meant for one.
So are we gonna be able
Turn
to
into
buy this
three.
for? Are we gonna be
Mhm.
able to buy this for Christmas stockings for everybody in a couple months?
Probably not quite. Maybe next Christmas, Christmas 2025.
Okay.
Okay.
Hopefully, cross
I
fingers.
think you could do it though. I totally think you could. You could pull it off by the 2024. I have faith in you, Terry. I have faith in you.
I will do my best.
All right.
You have my
No
pen.
pressure. No pressure though. All right, Jana. So what about you?
Yeah.
We'll
I'm
let
not
Terry breathe.
currently on the pen. Not currently on the pen. I have 2 urban fantasy series that both have elves in them, and once I crank those back up, then I will be writing elves again. But so Fallen Stone, which is already out, has elves in it. The rest of that series will as well. And when I start releasing the Diana McDonough books, those will also have elves in them. But those are after a couple of other things. So patience, they're coming.
So will your billionaire romance have elves in them?
He could be an elf. The billionaire could be an elf.
That is not appropriate to my contemporary genre, the way I'm doing it. But now I'm gonna have to. There's gonna have to be romantic elves. We're gonna do
Right.
it, and
Or she could be a
and
Christmas.
dedicate it to Jr.
She could be like one of the Christmas elves for Santa at the mall. That could be your tie-in. And is she really
That's
pretending
a
or
fun
isn't
elf.
she?
No.
I like that idea.
Well, it's a good idea. It will not fit this particular concept, but I will scribble that down as a potential for later.
Mhm.
Put it right up there with Smutty Yeti.
Yeah, all right. Harry and the Hendersons.
I
he
read closed
needed a partner. He needed a partner. I'm just saying, I provided him the love life that he needed for money. All right. And say what you will about it, but people spent the money to buy it.
Uh-huh.
All right. So we can keep the
Never not
family friendly writing. We're going to move on. And Chloe, so what are your current works that you're doing that have elves in them?
I am currently working on my massive fantasy universe, a book in the Queen's Chair series, which is very full of politics and economics and pirates and thieves. And the Queen is always in the middle of lots of political conflict. But at the bottom of it, a lot of it is based on the elves are trouble. And one of the highest insults that you can levy at someone in the city of Arida is to call them skinny, because it is invoking that their mama might have been an elf. They say son of an elf. And this is my fantasy substitution for an expletive. And this is one of those books where a lot of the politics with the elves are coming back up and becoming very, very relevant, and it's going to get wild.
All right. But are your pirates actually pirates, or did you go all Jake and the Neverland pirates and Disneyfy it?
They steal stuff and kill people.
Okay.
It's rather Caribbean, and it's not as bloodthirsty and grim as a lot of the pirate genre is, but they are thieves down deep.
The Roman legions and the pirates are often not told right from a historical perspective. Whatever they're written as, multiply it by 10 and then multiply it by 10 again for the brutality level, and you're probably pretty accurate. But I guess our modern sensibilities won't read that, so nobody does it anymore.
Yeah.
We don't talk
All
about
right.
Romans.
We did the pirates episode.
We did. I'm just saying it's a.
It was fun.
I had to sit through that Jake and the Neverland Pirates, and it just scarred my soul. I'm like, no, that is wrong.
I like romantic pirates. I like Johnny Depp. That's my favorite level of pirating.
It gave us so many good memes, though. But you've heard of me.
I have so much to tell you guys in the
heard of
after show. I have so much to tell you guys in the after show. I'm just
So,
like taking notes.
Melissa,
Yes.
is any of your worlds going to have elves in them, or that you're working on right now?
Yes. Okay. So I have a series called The Last Oracle, and when that wrapped up and the main character changed and became something new, I started a second series with that character called The Living Oracle. And one of the premises of this world that they're part of is that our world brushes up against other realities frequently. They're like little bubbles floating in the ether or whatever. And so for the second series, the bubble that they brushed up against is fairyland with the actual elves. And the thing about it is that the humans kind of trapped the elves in their world and slowly poisoned it by accident. So it's been 1,000 years of the elves living in poison, and they're pissed. So when they finally make it back to our world, they have a real grudge on. And that is the series that I'm not actively working on it at the moment because I'm writing War Master, but I'm gradually releasing the books that have been written, and hope to get back to it as soon as War Master is done. It's interesting. It's an interesting challenge. It's contemporary fantasy, so it's our world, modern times, but with fantastic elements.
So the War Master, how many books is that going to be?
Either 9 or 10, unless more of them become like the current book. The current book, book 7 that I'm writing, is it got really big. There was too much story to it, so it's not about length. It's about how much material there was. And I had to break it into 2. So it will either be 9 ultimately or 10 ultimately, depending on how that story works out. And
are there going to be any war hamsters in your War Master universe?
You know what? I'm starting to think maybe there should be. I'm captivated by the possibility of war hamsters. And
Nick wants me to write that story too, by the way. He's been pestering me.
You totally need to. I mean, that's just
he
great.
He wants to draw the cover for it. So
yes, yes. Oh, he should. He totally should.
So is the War Master universe, joking aside, is it going to have other races right now? I'm in book 2, and you're just seeing humans and then the monsters. Are you going to run into dwarves and elves and such?
There are no dwarves and elves. There are other monstrous, intelligent creatures that we will see in book 7. But one of the rules I had for myself for the War Master series was that the monsters would be mostly non-intelligent because of the way the system is built. That I thought that would be a little confusing and maybe a little bit creepy if there were intelligent, non-human, evil monsters. Because I think for a modern audience, we are used to the idea of the non-human monsters being misunderstood rather than evil. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go with that. So,
it's just postmodern nonsense. Sometimes evil is evil and good is good, and stories that have clearly delineated lines are a good thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going for. I didn't want to do, well, okay, with one exception. But for the most part, I'm going for, totally no elves in the War Master series.
Okay. So I will say that there are times where you could write the good guys and the bad guys. This is all shades of gray, and it's depending on what side you're on. Sure. I mean, you could argue, like, for instance, Nick's not here, so I've got to go to Star Wars just in his honor because he's at work right now. But like, you could argue you could argue that the Empire was just keeping the peace and the Jedi were terrorists, and I would believe that argument. There's grounds for it. Mm-hmm. But it was written to be murky, I think, and there's room for that kind of story. But there's also, I think, room and not enough of the where good is good and evil is evil, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it isn't the train coming to kill you.
If Palpatine wasn't the one in charge, if Senator Palpatine didn't become the power crazy person that he was, and the Empire just did the Empire things, I'd completely believe that the Jedi were just radicals. But Palpatine is the one that pushed everything to make it so dark. Because, I mean, he ordered them to kill younglings, and that was the moment that you're just like, oh, that's bad. That's bad.
But they didn't pick up their socks and they cleaned their room. So, I mean, can you really blame them? I'm just saying.
Don't go into a teenage boy's room.
All right.
That's true. That's true. I do that.
So I started writing a game-lit story with James that I don't have contracts for and I don't have the rights to do anything with, but I had so much fun doing that I have it on the back burner. I'm sort of doing all the world building on the side, but I'm going to do a game-lit that will have elves in it.
Yay.
It's all Melissa's fault because I started thinking so maybe a little differently, but I could do this too.
Yeah, totally. It's great fun.
I'm picking Jana's brain because she's been gaming longer than I have.
Mm-hmm.
Because she started in the womb, I'm told.
Not quite, but awful close.
Yeah, she had her first dice when she was like, still sucking from the bottle, and it's a thing. So I'm picking her brain.
Right. Yeah, don't ask Melissa about her kids and dice. because they
Oh,
got
yeah,
a bunch
you
of
don't-
very young.
You do not want to know the story about my child and the flea dice. That's not appropriate for this podcast.
I will
So
take your word for it, and you can tell us in the after show. But yeah,
I'll
so
tell
I'm
you in the
working,
after story. Yeah, in the after show. Yeah.
so I am working on a series with Elves.
Oh, cool.
Although more than that, I haven't, because we're still doing the world building, and I actually have a story that I wrote for an anthology called Ishtar's Rising. That's going to be the base of it. Only instead of finding aliens, they find the portal into the game. So, because the intro to that was started in basically taking it to Iraq War 3, so that way everything I know about the country and the tactics still work, but far enough into the future that it can kind of not become obsolete. I think sometimes when you write contemporary stuff, it can quickly become dated.
Yes.
Like the mystery novels where why didn't they just look it up on their cell phone?
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. And with that, we will wrap this puppy up. Isaac, how can they find you on the wild, wild interwebs?
You can find me on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, and that's basically where I am.
All right. Is there any truth to the rumor that if we follow you on Instagram, we see pictures of your cat?
Yes.
Outstanding.
Yes. Dogs
Do
too.
you make him wear sweaters? Is it a boy or a girl?
The one with me is he's an old man.
Okay.
Oh.
All right. And what is his name?
His name's Tiger Dew.
Tiger Dew. All right. And do you make him wear vests and cool outfits?
No.
Okay.
Does he have a monocle? He needs a monocle.
He needs some in a top hat. I'm digging it. All right, so we'll get you out of your shell eventually. We're going to drag you back for another episode. But all right, Terry, how can they find you on the wild, wild interwebs?
I am most commonly found on the Book of Face, sharing memes that sometimes I steal from JR.
And sometimes I steal from you.
He steals them
simpatico.
from me.
It's sharing at that point. It's all family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So long as you give an emoticon and before you share it, it's fine.
Absolutely. All right, and I will link to that in the show notes. Stabby, you're part of the podcast staff, so your stuff is my stuff now.
You never steal the scary stuff.
Well, I mean, we have to maintain our family-friendly rating, so some of the memes are just too dark. I mean, like, or they're they would not pass the moral censorship for their content with their crude humor, and that's all we will say. All right, Jana, before we lose our family-friendly rating tonight, fade to black. Tell us how they can find you on the internet.
I can be found at opalkingdompress.com or all over the various social medias as Jana S. Brown Writes or Jenna Ray Author. And I am not that hard to track down if you really want to.
Outstanding. All right, what about you, Madam Chloe, first of her name?
Oh, you can find me at chloegarner.com to catch up with what I'm working on. You can sign up for my newsletter to get updates to your inbox when I've got new stuff out. Or best of all worlds, you can come hang out on my Facebook group where we talk about many things, and they're lovely people.
So if we send you cans of Coke, do we get early access to chapters?
I could probably make that happen.
So you could be bribed, is what you're saying.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Coke and Keeblers. Got it.
Okay.
All right. We all have to have our standard and we all have our price. Me, beer and pizza, I'm pretty easy.
Just a minute.
But Coke and Keeblers works. All right, Melissa, how can they find you on the wild, wild interwebs?
My website is melissamcshane.com. I'm also on Facebook. I have a page and a readers group where I have not posted recently, but we do have fun. And this is my new young friend, Coriander, and he is a sweet little guy who kept me up all night begging to be petted. There he is. Come look at the camera. Hi there, sweet boy.
Oh my God. He's an elf.
He's an elf.
What's a poof?
He's just little. Goofy.
He is, but I promise I would try to keep this short, and I'm not very good at that. But so with that being said, you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the bit shoots, the rumbles, the YouTubes, the Twitters, our email, Blasters and Blades podcast. at gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people send all the hate mail to Madam Stabby Stab on Instagram, Twitter, email, or she runs our TikTok page. We also have our Facebook group and Facebook page where we have our website, anchor.fm/blasters-tech-and-tech-blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. We're for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. These episodes aren't free to produce, and that kitty needs food. So, every little bit helps with the keyboards, or kibbles, or whatever cats eat. I don't know. You could support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-host duly caffeinated. They will drink the coffee brand coffee until it pours out of her eyeballs. So much coffee.
Really,
Ow.
I had a whole pot of coffee today by myself because Nick didn't want any.
That sounds like winning to me. I even reached out.
Waste it.
I reached out because we had to fix an issue with the payment processing because PayPal glitched with Coffee Brand Coffee. And I did submit an inquiry and asked if they could, instead of sending cash, they could just send coffee. I was told marketing would get back with me. I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll see. We've got to have our
standard. A giant sticker with my newest order too. They're starting.
Will work for coffee is pretty standard, I think, in these circles. So, and again, since we mentioned the Coffee Brand Coffee, the link is in the show notes. Podcast Grunts is the code, gets you 10% off. And I realize I forgot to say this, but this is very important. So please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part. And if you especially like the elf in a book, say, hey, I like your elf. Because, why not? Every little bit helps. With that being said, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And now that we got Stabby, the cheesy jokes aren't just from me, so I'll take it. That's a win. Boom, and we're out. Wait for it.